He was born into the richest family in America. The Vanderbilt name opened every door in New York society. His father controlled railroads worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His childhood home was a 70-room mansion on Fifth Avenue. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt had every advantage a young man could dream of. The finest education money could buy. A trust fund that would make most families wealthy for generations. Connections to the most powerful people in the country. And he threw it all away. By the time he died at 45 years old, Reggie had gambled away a fortune. He had drunk himself into an early grave. He had married a teenager the same age as his own daughter. The doctors had warned him. His family had pleaded with him. None of it mattered. But his story did not end with his death. 9 years later, his youngest daughter became the center of what newspapers called the trial of the century. A custody battle so scandalous that judges cleared the courtroom. Testimony so shocking that front pages across America covered every detail. That little girl would grow up to become Gloria Vanderbilt. Her son would become one of the most recognized journalists in America. Anderson Cooper once said publicly that his mother made clear to him there is no trust fund. The fortune built by the Commodore was gone. This is the story of the man who helped destroy it, the heir who refused to build, the prince who chose pleasure over purpose, the Vanderbilt who became a warning to every generation that followed. His name was Reginald, and this is how he squandered one of the greatest fortunes ever assembled. Please subscribe now to support the channel if you enjoy my stories and documentaries. Now, let's dive into it. Chapter 1. The Heir Who Refused. The Vanderbilt family in 1880 was not merely wealthy, they were the wealthiest family in America. When Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt was born on January 14th of that year, his grandfather, William Henry Vanderbilt, controlled a railroad empire worth more than the United States Treasury. Reggie arrived as the youngest son of Cornelius Vanderbilt II and his wife, Alice Claypool Gwynne. The couple had already produced several children who would carry the family name into the new century. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, born 3 years earlier, was groomed from birth to lead the family business. Cornelius III, known as Neely, was expected to support his brother in managing the railroads. Reggie was the spare, the youngest, the one without a defined role. His childhood unfolded in surroundings that most Americans could barely imagine. The family divided their time between a mansion on Fifth Avenue and their summer cottage in Newport, Rhode Island. That cottage was called the Breakers. It contained 70 rooms and required a staff of dozens to maintain. Italian craftsmen had spent 2 years carving its marble interiors. For young Reggie, this world of unimaginable luxury was simply normal. Servants attended to his every need. Private tutors prepared him for the finest schools. The Vanderbilt name guaranteed his acceptance into circles that ordinary families could never enter. His father, Cornelius II, took his responsibilities seriously. Unlike some of his relatives who focused entirely on social climbing, Cornelius worked diligently at the family business. He expanded the railroad holdings. He managed investments carefully. He expected his sons to follow his example. Alfred embraced this expectation completely. He studied the railroad business. He learned to manage employees. He prepared himself to inherit the family empire. By all accounts, he was everything his father hoped for in an heir. Reggie showed no such inclination. The young Vanderbilt enrolled at Yale University, following the path expected of a man in his position. His classmates reportedly voted him most likely to succeed. They saw a handsome young man with unlimited resources and a famous name. The future seemed to hold nothing but promise. He dropped out after 2 years. The reasons for his departure remain somewhat unclear. Some accounts suggest academic difficulties. Others point to his growing interest in pursuits that had nothing to do with books or business. What is certain is that Reggie left Yale without a degree and without any apparent plan for his future. His father was not pleased. Cornelius II had built his life around duty and responsibility. He expected his sons to honor the family legacy through hard work and careful stewardship. A Yale dropout who showed no interest in the railroad business represented a profound disappointment. Then came the year that changed everything. In September of 1899, Cornelius Vanderbilt II died from a cerebral hemorrhage. He was only 55 years old. His death set in motion the distribution of one of the largest fortunes in American history. The will revealed the full extent of his disappointment in some of his children. Alfred, the responsible son, received the bulk of the estate. His inheritance totaled approximately $36.8 million. The family mansion, the role of patriarch, the expectation that he would lead the Vanderbilts into the 20th century. Neely received far less. His father had disapproved of his marriage to Grace Wilson, believing she had pursued his son for the Vanderbilt money. The will reflected this anger. Neely inherited only a fraction of what his younger brother received. Alfred reportedly felt guilty enough to gift his brother $6 million from his own share. And Reggie, the youngest son, received $7.4 million. This included $1.25 million in cash and a $5 million trust fund. By any normal standard, it was an enormous fortune. Compared to what Alfred received, it was a deliberate message. Cornelius II had seen something in his youngest son that troubled him. Perhaps he recognized the lack of ambition. Perhaps he feared what Reggie might do with unlimited resources. The reduced inheritance may have been an attempt to protect the family wealth from a son who seemed unlikely to preserve it. If that was his intention, history would prove him right. Reggie was 19 years old. He had $7.4 million. He had no education, no career, and no responsibilities. He had exactly what a gambling man needed. Chapter 2. The Prince of Gamblers. In the early 1900s, no gambler in America operated with more elegance than Richard Canfield. His establishments catered exclusively to the wealthy. No common man could walk through his doors. The stakes were enormous, the decor was exquisite, and the discretion was absolute. Canfield ran his most exclusive club at 5 East 44th Street in Manhattan. The brownstone looked unremarkable from the outside. This was intentional. Inside, wealthy men wagered fortunes on cards and roulette, while servants brought champagne and fine food. The police knew about the operation. So did prosecutors. But Canfield's clientele included some of the most powerful names in New York society. Touching Richard Canfield meant touching the Vanderbilts, the Whitneys, and dozens of other families who preferred their vices remain private. Reginald Vanderbilt became one of Canfield's most reliable customers. The young heir had money and time in unlimited quantities. The card tables offered excitement that business meetings never could. The rush of risking thousands on a single hand appealed to something deep in his character. Win or lose, he would return the next night. Canfield also operated a summer establishment in Saratoga Springs, New York. The town had long attracted wealthy Americans who came for the horse racing and the mineral springs. Canfield's casino there rivaled anything in Europe. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. The finest wines filled the cellars. And young men like Reggie Vanderbilt lost staggering sums at the tables. The culture of these establishments operated on credit. A gentleman did not carry cash. He signed markers, essentially IOUs, that promised payment later. The amounts could accumulate quickly. A bad night became a bad week. A bad week became a bad month. And suddenly, A young man owed more money than most Americans would see in a lifetime. According to court testimony that emerged years later, Reggie accumulated approximately $300,000 in debts to Canfield. The exact circumstances remain unclear, but records indicate he eventually settled these IOUs for around $130,000. Canfield apparently accepted the reduced payment rather than pursue the full amount. Why would a casino owner forgive more than half of what he was owed? The answer likely involves the value of keeping a Vanderbilt as a customer. Reggie would continue placing bets. He would bring wealthy friends. He would provide cover for an operation that existed in legal grey areas. Accepting a partial payment kept the relationship intact. The night of his 21st birthday reportedly demonstrated everything about Reggie's relationship with risk. According to accounts from the period, he lost approximately $70,000 that single evening. This was the night he officially gained access to his inheritance. While other young men might have celebrated such a milestone with champagne and friends, Reggie celebrated by wagering what many American families could live on for decades. $70,000 in 1901 had purchasing power equivalent to several $1,000,000 today. He lost it in one night, and he was just getting started. District Attorney William Travers Jerome eventually decided to challenge Richard Canfield's operation. Jerome was a reformer who believed the laws should apply equally to wealthy patrons and common criminals. He launched an investigation that would expose the inner workings of elite establishments. The case against Canfield relied partly on testimony about his famous clients. Court records from these proceedings revealed details about who played and how much they lost. This is how the public learned about Reggie's $300,000 debt. The Vanderbilt name appeared in newspapers alongside descriptions of enormous losses. For a family that valued privacy and respectability, the publicity was devastating. The Vanderbilts had built their reputation on business success and philanthropic contributions. Now one of their own was publicly associated with vice and unpaid debts. Canfield eventually pleaded guilty to running an illegal operation. He paid fines and closed his Manhattan club. But the damage to Reggie's reputation could not be undone with a court settlement. Society now knew how the youngest Vanderbilt son spent his nights. His brother Alfred must have watched these developments with concern. Alfred had inherited the family business. He managed the railroads. He maintained the social connections. And his younger brother was making headlines for all the wrong reasons. The wagering would continue throughout Reggie's life. No scandal seemed sufficient to change his behavior. No financial loss appeared large enough to make him reconsider. Some men bet for money. They calculate odds and manage risk. They approach the tables as a business with winners and losers. Reggie sought something else entirely. The money seemed almost irrelevant. He had more than he could ever spend. What captivated him was the uncertainty. For a man born into absolute security, the card table offered the only place where outcomes remained unknown. His fortune was guaranteed. His social position was assured. His future was predetermined by his last name. Only when the cards were dealt did anything feel undecided. That feeling would cost him everything. Chapter 3. Sandy Point Farm. There was one arena where Reginald Vanderbilt earned genuine respect, not inherited, not purchased, earned through demonstrated expertise. Reggie loved horses. This was not the casual interest of a rich man seeking another expensive hobby. He studied breeding lines with the focus of a scholar. He could evaluate a horse's conformation at a glance. He understood the subtle differences between a good carriage horse and a great one. In a world where he failed to apply himself to almost everything, horses captured his complete attention. By the early 1900s, Reggie had established himself as a recognized figure in American equestrian circles. He served as president of the National Horse Show Association, the organization that oversaw the most prestigious competition in the country. He led the American Hackney Horse Society, dedicated to promoting the distinctive carriage horses imported from England. These were not honorary positions handed to a wealthy donor. He earned them through knowledge and commitment. His passion required a proper setting, and Reggie built one. Sandy Point Farm rose on 280 acres of coastal land in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. The location placed him near Newport, where his family maintained the breakers, but far enough away to establish his own domain. Here, he would be master of his own estate. Construction began in the 1860s on what would become a sprawling complex. Reggie hired architect A.S. Walker to design stables worthy of the finest horses in America. The project continued for decades, with the main facilities completed around 1902. The result was extraordinary. The stable block contained 24 individual stalls, each designed to house valuable show horses in comfort. But the centerpiece was the indoor riding arena. At 15,000 square feet, it allowed training to continue regardless of weather. Massive cypress beams supported the roof. The space echoed with the sound of hooves on carefully maintained footing. For Reggie, Sandy Point represented evidence that he could manage a complex operation. He could direct a staff. He could produce results that experts acknowledged. The Hackney horse became his particular specialty. These animals originated in England, bred for their distinctive high-stepping gait and refined appearance. They pulled carriages with a style that no other breed could match. In an era before automobiles dominated the roads, a matched pair of hackneys represented the height of sophistication. Reggie imported some of the finest specimens from English breeders. He studied bloodlines obsessively. He competed in shows where judges evaluated horses on movement, conformation, and presence. And he won. Repeatedly. The National Horse Show at Madison Square Garden drew competitors from across the country. Wealthy owners brought their best animals to compete for ribbons and recognition. Reggie's horses from Sandy Point Farm regularly appeared among the winners. His name in the show catalogue carried weight beyond inheritance. He also bred horses at Sandy Point. This required patience and planning that seemed absent from other areas of his life. A breeder must think in generations. Decisions made today would not show results for years. The foal born this spring would not reach its potential until the end of the decade. It was the opposite of wagering at Canfield's tables. Yet Reggie excelled at it. His breeding program produced horses that other owners sought to acquire. Sandy Point Farm gained a reputation that extended far beyond Rhode Island. Knowledgeable horsemen recognized the name and valued what it represented. The estate employed a substantial staff. Grooms cared for the animals daily. Trainers worked with young horses to develop their potential. Groundskeepers maintained the paddocks and pastures. A farm manager coordinated the entire operation. Reggie directed an enterprise that functioned effectively under his leadership. Visitors to Sandy Point encountered a different Reggie than the one who appeared in newspaper stories about unpaid debts. Here was a man who rose early to check on his horses, who could discuss breeding theory for hours, who took visible pride in animals he had raised from foals. Some historians have suggested that horses provided Reggie with the sense of purpose that eluded him elsewhere. The railroad business held no appeal. Society parties bored him, but the challenge of producing a perfect carriage horse engaged him completely. Perhaps this explains why he kept Sandy Point Farm even as other assets disappeared. The estate represented his one undeniable accomplishment. He would die there, on the property he loved most. But that ending still lay years in the future. For now, Sandy Point Farm demonstrated that the wastrel possessed capabilities his detractors dismissed. The man who lost fortunes overnight could also build something that outlasted him. Both versions of Reggie were true. That tension defined his entire life. Chapter 4. 2 Wives, 2 Decades. In April of 1903, Reginald Vanderbilt married Kathleen Gebhard Nielsen at Parker Cottage in Newport, Rhode Island. The bride came from a respectable family. The groom was 23 years old and heir to millions. Newspapers covered the wedding as expected for a Vanderbilt union. By the standards of the Gilded Age, it was a suitable match. Kathleen brought acceptability. Reggie brought the most famous surname in America. Their families approved. The ceremony proceeded without scandal. A daughter was born the following year. They named her Kathleen, after her mother. The child would grow up in the world of Newport summers and Manhattan winters that defined elite American life. She would never want material comfort, but the marriage itself provided little comfort to either party. Reggie continued his habits, the card tables, the long nights with bottles of whiskey, the absences that left his wife alone in their townhouse. Kathleen had married a Vanderbilt and received all the privileges that name provided. She had also married a man incapable of fidelity or restraint. The couple stayed together for 17 years. Whether this reflected genuine attempts at reconciliation or simply the stigma of divorce is unclear. Wealthy families in that era often maintained appearances regardless of private misery. A Vanderbilt divorce would fill gossip columns for weeks. Both parties may have preferred an unhappy marriage to public failure. By 1920, the pretense ended. Kathleen filed for divorce and received custody of their daughter. The settlement terms stayed confidential, but Kathleen secured her financial future and her freedom. She would later remarry and live a quiet life away from the Vanderbilt spotlight. Reggie was 40 years old. His first marriage had lasted nearly 2 decades. His nights at the card tables had consumed much of his inheritance. His drinking had become impossible to hide. Physicians had reportedly warned him that his liver was failing. He responded by chasing a teenager. Gloria Morgan was 18 years old when she caught Reggie's attention. Born in Switzerland to American parents, she had grown up moving between Europe and the United States. She and her twin sister Thelma were striking young women who drew attention in every ballroom they entered. They possessed beauty, charm, and determination in equal measure. The Morgan twins recognized that their looks provided their only real currency. Their family had status, but limited funds. Marriage to a wealthy man offered their path forward. Both sisters would follow this strategy with remarkable success. Thelma would eventually become the mistress of the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VIII. She would introduce him to another American woman named Wallis Simpson. That introduction would change British history. But in 1922, Thelma and Gloria were simply 2 beautiful sisters navigating the upper classes with calculated precision. Reggie met Gloria at a party. He was 42, she was 17. The age difference alone should have raised concerns. His daughter Kathleen from his first marriage was the same age as this new object of his affection. He was chasing a girl young enough to be his child. None of this stopped him. On March 6, 1923, Reginald Vanderbilt married Gloria Morgan. He was 43. She was 18. The ceremony took place quietly, without the elaborate Newport celebration of his first wedding. Perhaps both parties sensed that this union would attract criticism rather than congratulations. Gloria later claimed she loved Reggie despite his flaws. Perhaps she did. She certainly grasped what marriage to a Vanderbilt meant: access to mansions and servants, entry into the highest circles of American life, wealth that her family could never provide. The cost of that access would become clear soon enough. Reggie's health was deteriorating visibly. The years of drinking had damaged his liver beyond repair. His physicians had delivered their warnings. He had ignored them. Now he was a newly married man with a body that was failing him. Gloria became pregnant almost immediately. On February 20th, 1924, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Gloria Laura Vanderbilt. The baby entered a household shadowed by her father's illness. She would have no memories of him as a healthy man. The new family settled into the townhouse at 12 East 77th Street in Manhattan. They spent time at Sandy Point Farm in Rhode Island. From the outside, it looked like a Vanderbilt life of privilege and ease. Inside, Gloria was nursing a dying husband while caring for an infant daughter. The glamorous marriage she had sought was becoming a death watch. Reggie had 18 months left to live. Chapter 5. The Bottle. Prohibition became law in January of 1920. The manufacture, sale, and transport of alcohol was now illegal across the United States. For most Americans, obtaining a drink suddenly required breaking the law. For Reginald Vanderbilt, nothing changed. The wealthy had always lived by different rules. While federal agents raided speakeasies in working-class neighborhoods, the elite continued drinking in their private clubs and mansions. Bootleggers delivered to the back doors of Fifth Avenue townhouses. Servants poured whiskey into crystal glasses as if the 18th Amendment did not exist. Reggie drank with the steadiness of a man committed to his own destruction. This was not social drinking at dinner parties. This was not the occasional excess of celebration. He drank in the morning. He drank through the afternoon. He drank until he could no longer stand. The staff at Sandy Point Farm and the Manhattan townhouse witnessed it daily. Gloria later described life with her husband in terms that suggested constant crisis. He would be charming and attentive one moment, then unreachable the next. The man she had married existed in fragments between binges. She was 19 years old, pregnant, and living with an alcoholic twice her age. His physicians had already delivered their verdict. Now the symptoms they predicted were appearing. Jaundice turned his skin yellow. His abdomen swelled with fluid. Fatigue settled into his bones and never left. The medical understanding of these signs was limited in the 1920s, but everyone recognized what they meant. Many men would have reconsidered their choices upon seeing such evidence in the mirror. They would have attempted moderation. They would have thought about their young wife and the child she was carrying. Reggie poured another drink. Some accounts suggest he increased his consumption after learning the diagnosis. Whether this represented denial, despair, or simple addiction remains unknown. What is documented is that he made no effort to stop. The damage kept accumulating. His appearance changed in ways that shocked those who remembered the handsome young heir from 2 decades earlier. Photographs from his final months show a bloated face and yellowed eyes. He looked 2 decades older than his actual age. He still walked among his horses when his strength permitted. He still examined the animals he had bred. But the vigorous horseman who had won ribbons at Madison Square Garden was gone. In his place moved a sick man, counting down his remaining days. Little Gloria spent her first year in a household defined by her father's illness. Nurses and servants managed the child, while her mother managed everything else. Gloria was 20 years old, caring for a toddler and a dying husband simultaneously. The final summer arrived in 1925. The horses grazed in the pastures. The indoor arena stood empty. The stables that had once represented his proudest achievement now simply provided a backdrop. Gloria stayed with him. Whatever her original motivations for marriage, she did not leave. She was about to become a widow at 21. The end came on September 4th, 1925. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt died at Sandy Point Farm from cirrhosis. He had been married to Gloria for 2.5 years. His daughter was 18 months old. The obituaries noted his family connections and his accomplishments with horses. They mentioned his Newport lineage. They were polite about the cause of death. Everyone who knew him understood what had happened. Chapter 6. What he left behind. The lawyers gathered to read the will. Gloria sat as the young widow, holding documents that would determine her future. Her husband had been dead only days. Now she would learn what remained. The numbers confirmed what everyone suspected. Reggie had established a trust fund for his 2 daughters. Kathleen from his first marriage and little Gloria from his second would split approximately $5 million between them. This money would be managed by trustees until the girls reached adulthood. Neither child would have direct access for years. For his widow, the provisions were more complicated. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt would receive income from the trust, capped at approximately $112,000 per year. She also inherited the townhouse on 77th Street and Sandy Point Farm. $112,000 annually was substantial by ordinary standards. But her sisters-in-law controlled fortunes measured in tens of millions. Her husband's aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, commanded assets exceeding $70 million. In the world, Gloria had entered through marriage. Her income qualified as modest. The properties came with their own burdens. The Manhattan townhouse required staff to maintain. Sandy Point Farm demanded constant investment. Real estate generated prestige, but consumed cash. Of the $7.4 million Reggie had inherited in 1899, almost nothing liquid remained. 26 years of spending without hesitation or limit. His brother Alfred had died aboard the Lusitania in 1915. He left behind an estate larger than what he had originally received. The contrast between the brothers needed no explanation. Gloria found herself in an impossible position. She was 21 years old, with an infant daughter whose trust fund she could not touch. She had the Vanderbilt name without the Vanderbilt resources. The family watched her with suspicion. She was raising a Vanderbilt heiress on what they considered an inadequate sum. Her fitness as a mother would eventually be challenged in the most public way imaginable. But that confrontation lay years in the future. For now, Gloria faced the task of building a life from what remained. Little Gloria would grow up comfortable by any normal measure. Her trust fund would provide security. But the unlimited abundance that previous Vanderbilt generations had enjoyed was gone. Her father had seen to that. Chapter 7. The Trial of the Century. 9 years after Reggie's death, his youngest daughter became the most talked-about child in America. Little Gloria was 10 years old in the autumn of 1934. She had spent her childhood shuttled between relatives and caretakers. Her mother travelled extensively through Europe, attending parties and pursuing romances. The girl often remained behind with her nurse or stayed at the Long Island estate of her aunt Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Gertrude was everything Gloria Morgan was not. Born a Vanderbilt, married into the Whitney fortune, she had founded the Whitney Museum of American Art and earned respect as a sculptor. At 60 years old, she believed her niece deserved stability that the mother seemed unable to provide. In the summer of 1934, Gertrude filed for custody. The case landed in the New York Supreme Court before Justice John Francis Carew. What followed pushed even the Depression off the front pages. Reporters packed the chamber daily. Every accusation made headlines. The public devoured each detail. The nurse spoke first. Emma Sullivan Keislich had cared for little Gloria since infancy. She described the mother as neglectful, rarely present. When she did appear, she brought chaos. Kaiserlich painted a portrait of a cocktail-obsessed woman who danced until dawn while her daughter slept alone. The maid's account proved more explosive. Maria Caio had worked in Gloria Morgan's Paris household. Speaking through a translator, she described scenes that forced Justice Carew to clear the chamber. She claimed to have witnessed Gloria Morgan in bed with Lady Milford Haven, a member of the British royal family. The accusation of a lesbian affair sent reporters scrambling. The remaining sessions proceeded in private to protect the child. But newspapers had already printed every word. Gloria Morgan's reputation lay in ruins. The mother denied everything. She portrayed herself as a loving parent, targeted by relatives who wanted control of her daughter's money. She accused Gertrude of turning the girl against her. She insisted that servants had fabricated stories. Little Gloria was called to speak in the judge's chambers, away from the press. The 10-year-old said she was afraid of her mother. She wanted to stay with Aunt Gertrude. Those words effectively ended the case. Justice Carew awarded custody to Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Gloria Morgan received weekend visits and portions of the summer. She found herself largely excluded from her own daughter's life. The press dubbed the child the poor little rich girl. Editorial cartoons depicted her caught between grasping adults. Commentators debated whether money could substitute for genuine family bonds. A girl who had done nothing wrong became a symbol of dysfunction among the privileged. Reggie's choices had made all of this possible. A widow left dependent on family generosity, a daughter whose inheritance attracted conflict from every direction. The conditions for exactly this kind of battle. Gloria Morgan never recovered. She lived the rest of her life defined by what had been said in that chamber. True or false, the accusations followed her permanently. Little Gloria grew up under Gertrude's supervision until her aunt died in 1942. She later described her childhood as lonely and controlled. The poor little rich girl had plenty of money and very little peace. She would eventually reclaim the Vanderbilt name on her own terms, but that required decades of distance from everything her parents had left behind. Chapter 8. The Auction. The horses had to go. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt faced arithmetic without alternatives in the autumn of 1925. Sandy Point Farm consumed more money than her income could sustain. The stables required grooms. The animals required feed and veterinary care. The grounds required constant attention. The solution was obvious and painful. The auction attracted buyers from across the Northeast. Word had spread that the Vanderbilt stables were dispersing. Breeders who had once competed against Reggie now came to acquire his bloodlines. Dealers sensed opportunity. One by one, the animals left the property. Mares selected for their conformation. Stallions purchased at considerable expense. Foals born in stables designed with such care. Each sale scattered what had taken 20 years to assemble. The grooms who had worked at Sandy Point watched their charges disappear into trailers. Some had known these horses since birth. Now they loaded them for transport to farms they would never see. Gloria felt nothing sentimental about any of it. She had married Reggie for reasons unrelated to hackneys or breeding programs. The stables represented obligation. Selling them meant freedom. For those who understood what Reggie had built, the auction marked an ending. A breeding program cannot be reassembled once dispersed. The genetic combinations he had cultivated would scatter across dozens of farms, owned by people with different goals. The property faced a similar fate. 280 acres could not be maintained on her income. The land would need to be divided and sold. Future owners would carve it into smaller parcels. The main stable complex survived. The indoor arena remained standing, but without horses to fill the stalls, the buildings served only as reminders of what had been. Gloria kept what she needed. The townhouse in Manhattan provided a residence. Portions of Sandy Point offered a retreat. Everything else converted to cash. The auction completed what Reggie's death had begun. His daughter would inherit money held by lawyers. His widow would inherit complications. His horses would simply move to new owners who had never known him. Sandy Point Farm continued as an equestrian facility under subsequent owners. The stables still stand today. In 2024, the property was listed for auction again, marketed as a historic Vanderbilt estate for a few $1 million. The breeding program exists only in pedigree records now. The name Vanderbilt serves as marketing rather than identification. Chapter 9. The Vanderbilt Curse. Reginald Vanderbilt was not an anomaly. He was a symptom. The pattern began with the Commodore himself. Cornelius Vanderbilt had built his fortune through relentless work and ruthless competition. He started with a single ferry boat in 1810. By the time he died in 1877, he controlled railroads and shipping lines worth approximately $100 million. This sum exceeded the entire United States Treasury. No American had ever accumulated such wealth. The Commodore expected it to last forever. His will concentrated the fortune in his eldest son, William Henry. The old man believed that dividing wealth destroyed it. One heir should control everything. William Henry understood this philosophy. He doubled the family holdings during his lifetime and passed them to his own sons with instructions to preserve the principal. Those sons had different ideas. The third generation grew up without memory of struggle. They had never worked a ferry route or negotiated a railroad merger. They knew only the mansions, the servants, the assumption that money would always appear when needed. They began spending in ways that would have horrified their grandfather. Fifth Avenue transformed into a competition of excess. William Kissam Vanderbilt built a chateau. His sister-in-law Alice responded with a larger one. George Washington Vanderbilt constructed Biltmore in North Carolina, the largest private residence in America. Each project cost millions. Each required armies of servants to maintain. The fourth generation accelerated the decline. Reggie belonged to this cohort. So did dozens of cousins who shared his appetite for luxury without his grandfather's capacity for creation. They threw parties that cost more than most Americans earned in a decade. They purchased art, yachts, racehorses, and European titles for their daughters. Meanwhile, the source of their wealth was dying. The New York Central Railroad had made the Vanderbilts rich, but transportation was changing. Automobiles replaced passenger trains. Trucks competed for freight. Airlines captured long-distance travelers. The railroad that had seemed invincible in 1880 was struggling by 1930. The family sold their shares gradually, converting ownership into cash that funded their lifestyles. By mid-century, no Vanderbilt held a significant position in the company their great-grandfather had built. New York Central merged with Pennsylvania Railroad in 1968. The combined entity declared bankruptcy in 1970. The mansions disappeared even faster. The great houses on Fifth Avenue required enormous staffs and generated no income. Property taxes and maintenance consumed fortunes. One by one, the family sold their Manhattan residences to developers. The wrecking balls arrived. By 1947, every Vanderbilt mansion on Fifth Avenue had been demolished. Office buildings and apartment towers rose in their place. Newport fared slightly better. The Breakers survived as a museum, preserved by the Historical Society. Marble House became a tourist attraction. The summer cottages that had once hosted the elite now welcomed paying visitors who wandered through rooms where Vanderbilts had danced. In 1973, 120 descendants of the Commodore gathered for a family reunion. Reporters noted a remarkable fact. Among all those assembled, not a single one was a millionaire. The greatest fortune in American history had evaporated in 4 generations. Anderson Cooper, the journalist and great-great-great-great-grandson of the Commodore, confirmed this reality publicly. His mother, Gloria, had made clear to him that no trust fund existed. The Vanderbilt name provided recognition, but not wealth. He would need to build his own career. Reggie's story fits this larger pattern precisely. He did not destroy the family fortune alone. He participated in a collective failure that spanned generations. The spending without earning. The assumption that wealth required no maintenance. The confusion of inheritance with accomplishment. Biltmore alone survives as a family enterprise. George Washington. Vanderbilt's descendants still operate the estate as a commercial venture. They charge admission, host weddings, and sell wine from their vineyard. The largest house in America sustains itself through tourism rather than railroad dividends. This is what remains of $100 million. The Commodore built an empire through decades of labor. His descendants dismantled it in less time than he had spent constructing it. Reggie played his part in that destruction. So did nearly everyone who shared his name. The curse was not supernatural. It was simply mathematics. Spend more than you earn, generation after generation, and eventually the account's empty. No fortune survives heirs who treat it as inexhaustible. The Vanderbilts learned this lesson too late. By the time they understood, there was nothing left to save. Chapter 10. The Brother Who Died a Hero. 2 brothers, 2 deaths. One remembered with shame, the other with honor. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt was 3 years older than Reggie. They had grown up in the same mansions, attended the same schools, inherited from the same father, but where those paths led could not have been more different. By 1915, Alfred had established himself as a prominent figure in American society. He bred horses at his Sagamore farm in Maryland. He served on corporate boards. He married twice and fathered 2 sons. At 37 years old, he seemed to have decades of accomplishment ahead of him. In late April of that year, Alfred booked passage on the RMS Lusitania. The British ocean liner was one of the fastest ships crossing the Atlantic. He planned to attend a meeting of the International Horse Breeders Association in London. The journey would take less than a week. Germany had declared the waters around Britain a war zone. Submarines patrolled the Atlantic hunting Allied vessels. The German embassy in Washington had published warnings in American newspapers, advising passengers not to sail on British ships. Alfred read these warnings and boarded anyway. The Lusitania departed New York on May 1st, 1915. Nearly 2,000 people were aboard. The ship carried civilians, including women and children, alongside cargo bound for England. The passengers dined in elegant saloons and strolled the decks, confident that the ship's speed would protect them from any submarine. On May 7th, the Lusitania approached the coast of Ireland. She was 11 miles from the old Head of Kinsale when a German U-boat spotted her. At 2:12 in the afternoon, the submarine fired a single torpedo. The explosion tore through the starboard side. A second internal blast followed almost immediately, likely caused by ammunition stored in the cargo hold. The great ship began listing so severely that lifeboats on one side could not be launched. Passengers scrambled for the tilting decks. The Lusitania sank in 18 minutes. Alfred had been eating lunch in the first-class dining room when the torpedo struck. He made his way to the deck amid the chaos. Crew members were struggling to lower lifeboats into the water. Passengers fought for places. Children screamed for parents they could not find. What happened next became the defining moment of his life. Alfred was carrying a life jacket. He encountered a young mother holding an infant. neither of whom had any flotation device. Without hesitation, he gave his life jacket to her. He then helped other passengers find places in the remaining boats. Witnesses reported seeing him assist women and children while the deck tilted beneath his feet. He made no attempt to save himself. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt went down with the Lusitania. His body was never recovered. He was 37 years old. His sons would grow up without a father. His estate, valued at approximately $15 million, passed to his heirs. The sinking killed 1,198 people. The attack on a civilian vessel carrying American passengers outraged the United States. Historians consider it one of the events that eventually drew America into the First World War. Among the dead, Alfred's story stood out. Newspapers reported his final act of selflessness. He became a symbol of courage under impossible circumstances. The man who had been born into privilege had died, giving what he had to a stranger. 10 years later, Reggie would die at Sandy Point Farm. His death came slowly, the result of choices made over decades. He had been warned repeatedly. He had ignored every warning. His end surprised no one. Alfred's death came in 18 minutes. He had no warning, no time to prepare, no opportunity to reconsider. In that compressed moment, he revealed something that years of comfortable living had never tested. Their father, Cornelius, had worried about Reggie and trusted Alfred. The size of their inheritances reflected those judgments. History validated his concerns more completely than he could have imagined. One gave his life jacket to a mother and child. The other poured another drink, brothers to the end. Chapter 11. The Woman Who Built a Museum. The custody trial told only part of her story. The woman who took little Gloria from her mother had spent decades building something far more significant than a legal case. Gertrude Vanderbilt was born in 1875, 5 years before Reggie. She grew up in the same world of mansions and servants. She attended the same elaborate parties. She was presented to society and expected to marry well and manage a household. She did marry well. Harry Payne Whitney came from a fortune built on oil and banking. Their wedding in 1896 united two of America's wealthiest families. Gertrude moved from one gilded cage to another. But she wanted something else entirely. From childhood, Gertrude had shown talent for art. She sketched and modeled clay while her brothers learned about railroads. Her family considered this an acceptable hobby for a young woman of her station. They did not expect her to pursue it seriously. She pursued it anyway. After her marriage, Gertrude began studying sculpture formally. She worked with established artists in New York. She traveled to Paris to learn techniques from European masters. She rented studio space where she could work without the distractions of household management. Her family found this eccentric. Vanderbilt women were supposed to host charity galas and summer in Newport. They were not supposed to spend their days covered in plaster dust, shaping figures from bronze and marble. Gertrude ignored their confusion. The art world presented different obstacles. Wealthy patrons were welcome. Wealthy artists were suspect. Critics assumed that anyone with her resources could buy favorable reviews and gallery placement. They questioned whether her work had genuine merit or simply reflected her ability to purchase recognition. Gertrude responded by working harder. Her sculptures depicted laborers, soldiers, and athletes. She avoided the decorative subjects that wealthy amateurs typically chose. Her style was muscular and direct. She wanted her work judged on its own terms. Gradually, she earned respect. Her monuments were installed in public spaces across the country. The Titanic Memorial in Washington depicted a male figure with arms outstretched, honoring the men who gave their lives for women and children. The Buffalo Bill statue in Cody, Wyoming, captured the frontiersman on horseback. These were serious commissions awarded on artistic merit. But Gertrude understood that her own success meant little if other artists could not find opportunities. The established museums and galleries favored European work. American artists struggled to exhibit and sell. Young painters and sculptors with genuine talent could not reach collectors who might support them. In 1907, she began purchasing work directly from American artists. She converted a stable behind her MacDougall Alley studio into exhibition space. The Whitney Studio opened in 1914, offering shows to artists who could not secure gallery representation elsewhere. She was not simply collecting, she was building infrastructure. The Whitney Studio Club followed in 1918. Members could exhibit, attend lectures, and meet other artists. Edward Hopper showed his work there before anyone knew his name. Stuart Davis and Joseph Steller found early support. Gertrude funded everything without demanding credit or control. By 1929, her collection had grown to over 500 works. She offered to donate everything to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The collection included paintings and sculptures by the most promising American artists of the generation. It was worth millions. The Metropolitan declined. The museum's director saw no need for a dedicated American collection. European masters remained the priority. He suggested that Gertrude's holdings might find a home in some regional institution. The rejection was polite and devastating. Gertrude did not argue. She built her own museum instead. The Whitney Museum of American Art opened in 1931 on West 8th Street in Greenwich Village. The building provided gallery space, a library, and facilities for educational programs. American art finally had a permanent home in New York. The museum outlived her. Gertrude died in 1942, leaving behind sculptures, a collection, and an institution that continues to shape American culture. The Whitney moved to larger buildings as its collection expanded. It now stands on Gansevoort Street, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. She had taken the same fortune that destroyed her brother and transformed it into something permanent. What Reggie wasted on gambling and drinking, Gertrude invested in artists who had nothing. Both choices reflected character. Both produced consequences that extended far beyond their lifetimes. The Vanderbilt name appears on university buildings and museum walls. Most of those honors were purchased with donations. Gertrude earned her legacy differently. She made things with her hands. She recognized talent in others and provided resources to develop it. Her brother left behind auction records and scandal. She left behind the Whitney Museum. Chapter 12. The Last Great Estate. Most Vanderbilt properties became parking lots and office towers. One became something else entirely. George Washington Vanderbilt was the youngest son of William Henry and the uncle of both Reggie and Alfred. Born in 1862, he showed little interest in the railroad business that had made his family wealthy. He preferred books, art, and languages. By his 20s, he had assembled a library of over 20,000 volumes and could read in 8 languages. His brothers built mansions in New York and Newport to impress society. George had a different vision. He wanted to create something in the wilderness. In 1888, George visited Asheville, North Carolina. The mountain air was considered healthful. The Blue Ridge landscape offered beauty that Newport could not match. He began purchasing land quietly, farm by farm, until he controlled 125,000 acres. Then he hired the best. Richard Morris Hunt had designed the grandest Vanderbilt homes in New York and Newport. George asked him to design something unprecedented. Frederick Law Olmsted, who had created Central Park, would design the grounds. The project would take 6 years and employ over 1,000 workers. Construction began in 1889. Workers quarried limestone from the estate itself. A private railroad delivered materials to the site. Craftsmen came from across the country and Europe to execute the designs. The scale exceeded anything attempted in American residential architecture. The house contained 250 rooms. The banquet hall ceiling rose 70 feet. A winter garden brought the outdoors inside year-round. The basement held a swimming pool, a gymnasium, and a bowling alley. Every detail reflected George's tastes and Olmsted's understanding of how buildings should connect to landscape. George named it Biltmore, combining the Dutch word for his ancestral region with the English word for rolling hills. The estate opened on Christmas Eve, 1895. Guests arrived to find a house that rivaled European palaces set against American mountains. But George had ambitions beyond impressive architecture. He hired Gifford Pinchot, a young forester trained in Europe, to manage the woodlands scientifically. This was the first large-scale forestry program in America. Pinchot later became the first chief of the United States Forest Service. The techniques developed at Biltmore influenced conservation policy for generations. George also established model farms, a dairy, and a village for estate workers. He envisioned Biltmore as a self-sustaining community, not merely a residence. The property should produce as well as consume. This philosophy distinguished him from relatives who treated their estates purely as showcases for wealth. In 1898, George married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser. Their daughter Cornelia arrived in 1900. The family divided their time between Biltmore and properties in Washington and Paris. George continued acquiring art and expanding his library. His death came suddenly in 1914, following an appendectomy in Washington. He was 51 years old. The estate passed to Edith, who faced the challenge of maintaining a property that cost enormous sums to operate. She made a decision that would determine Biltmore's survival. Rather than sell or demolish, Edith adapted. She sold 87,000 acres to the federal government, which became Pisgah National Forest. The proceeds funded continued operation of the remaining property. She reduced staff, but maintained the house and core grounds. When the Depression threatened even this reduced operation, Edith and Cornelia made another choice. In 1930, they opened Biltmore to paying visitors. The admission fees would help cover maintenance costs. Tourists could now walk through rooms where Vanderbilts had entertained presidents. The gamble worked. Biltmore attracted visitors who wanted to glimpse how the wealthy had lived. The house offered something no demolished Manhattan mansion could provide: actual rooms with actual furnishings, gardens that Olmsted had designed, a window into a vanished era. Cornelia married John Cecil, a British diplomat, and their descendants continued operating the estate. Each generation faced decisions about preservation versus profit. They added a winery, a hotel, restaurants, and event facilities. The estate became a business rather than simply a residence. Today, Biltmore welcomes over 1 million visitors annually. The house remains privately owned by George's descendants. No government funding or preservation society maintains it. The family sustains the property through commercial operations that George might have found surprising, but would likely have appreciated. This outcome was not inevitable. Every other great Vanderbilt estate faced demolition or conversion to institutional use. Biltmore survived because the people who inherited it chose preservation over liquidation. George had built something meant to last. His heirs decided to honor that intention. The combination of vision and stewardship produced an outcome unique among Vanderbilt properties. Reggie inherited money and spent it. George inherited money and built something that outlasted him by more than a century. Both approaches were available to every Vanderbilt heir. The choices they made determined what remained. Chapter 13. The Palaces They Left Behind. Every summer, 500,000 people walk through rooms where the Vanderbilts once danced. They pay admission at the gate. They follow roped pathways through ballrooms and bedrooms. They listen to audio guides describing furniture and artwork. They photograph fireplaces that servants once kept burning through August nights when the family entertained. The tourists are experiencing something the original owners never intended. These houses were built for exclusion. Now anyone with $30 can enter. The Preservation Society of Newport County made this transformation possible. Founded in 1945, the organization began acquiring mansions that families could no longer afford to maintain. The properties had become liabilities. Heating costs alone consumed small fortunes. Staffing requirements exceeded what reduced inheritances could support. Demolition seemed inevitable. The society offered an alternative. They would maintain the houses as museums, preserving architectural heritage while generating revenue through admissions. Families who donated or sold their properties could avoid the guilt of destruction while escaping the burden of ownership. The breakers came first. Countess Gladys Szczeciniak, the daughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt III, leased the house to the Preservation Society in 1948. Her family retained ownership, but transferred operational responsibility. The arrangement allowed the mansion to open for tours while technically remaining in Vanderbilt hands. Visitors encountered something unprecedented, not a reconstructed historic site or a furnished period room in a larger museum. An actual house where an actual family had lived within recent memory. The silver still bore monograms. The linens still carried the scent of careful storage. Everything was real. The response exceeded expectations. Tourists arrived by the thousands. They wanted to see how the wealthy had lived during an era that seemed impossibly distant, despite having ended only decades earlier. The breakers became Newport's primary attraction. Other mansions followed. Marble House, built by William Kissam Vanderbilt for his wife Alva, joined the Society's portfolio in 1963. Rosecliff, modelled on the Grand Trianon at Versailles, opened to the public in 1971. The Elms, Château-sur-Mer, Kingscote, and others gradually came under preservation management. Each house told a different story. Marble House demonstrated what a determined social climber could achieve with unlimited funds. Rosecliff showed the influence of European design on American taste. The breakers simply overwhelmed with scale and expense. The experience of visiting has a peculiar quality. Tourists walk through spaces designed to intimidate guests who arrived in carriages wearing evening dress. They shuffle past velvet ropes in sneakers and shorts. The grandeur remains, but the context has inverted completely. Guides explain that the families occupied these houses for only 8 to 10 weeks each summer. The rest of the year, dozens of servants maintained empty rooms, polishing silver that no one used, and dusting furniture that no one touched. The waste seems almost incomprehensible now. Some visitors feel admiration. The craftsmanship evident in every detail represents skills that barely exist today. Artisans spent years executing designs that architects spent months perfecting. Whatever else the Vanderbilts were, they employed people who created beautiful things. Other visitors feel something closer to revulsion. The excess documented in these rooms existed alongside poverty that the owners never acknowledged. Servants slept in attic quarters, while guests lounged in bedrooms the size of ordinary houses. The inequality was architectural. Most visitors probably feel both responses simultaneously. The houses are beautiful and obscene. impressive and wasteful, worth preserving and difficult to justify. The Preservation Society has found ways to make the properties generate revenue beyond admissions. Weddings now take place in ballrooms where Vanderbilt's once announced engagements. Corporate events fill dining rooms designed for 30 guests. The mansions have become venues, their history serving as backdrop for contemporary celebrations. This would have horrified the original owners. They built these houses specifically to exclude people who lacked proper social credentials. The daughter of a factory worker can now exchange vows in Marble House if she can afford the rental fee. Money alone provides access. Lineage no longer matters. Perhaps that represents a kind of justice. The families who built these monuments to exclusivity lost control of them within a few generations. The houses outlasted the fortunes that created them. Now they belong to everyone willing to purchase a ticket. Newport itself has adapted to its role as a museum district. Restaurants and hotels serve visitors who come primarily for the mansions. The local economy depends on continued interest in how the Vanderbilts and their peers lived. Preservation became an industry. The family members who donated these properties made possible something their ancestors would never have permitted: public access to private spaces, democratic tourism replacing aristocratic exclusion. The transformation took less than a century. Reggie never spent much time in Newport society. His interests lay elsewhere. But the world he was born into survives there in physical form. Visitors can walk through rooms where his parents entertained, where his relatives displayed their wealth, where the Gilded Age performed its most elaborate rituals. The parties ended long ago. The guests are all dead. The servants who maintained these houses have no successors. Only the buildings remain, filled now with strangers who pay for the privilege of imagining what it might have been like to belong. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt lived 45 years. He left behind 2 daughters, 2 ex-wives, and a cautionary tale that outlasted everything else. He was not the only Vanderbilt who squandered an inheritance, but he may have been the most complete example of the pattern. No business ventures, no artistic legacy, no heroic final act. Just decades of spending followed by an early death. His siblings chose differently. Alfred died giving his life jacket to a stranger. Gertrude built a museum that still shapes American culture. Even distant relatives like George created something meant to outlast them. Reggie created nothing. He only consumed. His youngest daughter proved that the name did not determine the outcome. Gloria Vanderbilt transformed herself across 9 decades. She worked as an actress, a painter, and a writer. Her fashion empire made her wealthy through effort rather than inheritance. The little girl, once pitied by newspaper readers, built her own fortune. Her son Anderson Cooper confirmed what she had taught him. There was no trust fund. The Vanderbilt wealth existed only as history. He would need to earn his own way. The mansions in Newport now welcome tourists. Biltmore sells wine and hosts weddings. The Whitney Museum hangs art that Gertrude collected when no one else would. These institutions survive because someone decided to build rather than spend. Reggie decided otherwise. That was his choice, and his legacy. The name Vanderbilt still carries recognition. It appears on university buildings and museum walls. But the fortune that made it famous disappeared within 4 generations. Only the warnings remain, and the stories we tell about what went wrong.